What causes cultural variations? Well, in the book and in probably other videos you might have watched, one reason is the environment you live in, as well as the resources you have access to. Another way of thinking about causes of cultural variation, though, is through proximal and distal causes. Shortly defined, proximal causes are direct and immediate effects that can explain why one culture is different from another culture, whereas distal causes are initial differences that happened maybe a long time ago that led to effects over a period of history, where each effect built on the other. In another way of putting it, proximal causes are recent, distal causes are history, are in the past. So one example we might use here is through the question of how did a small band of Spanish soldiers overthrow the Incan Empire? Why do we see differences in Spanish culture versus the Incan culture at the time? One answer to this question that is proximal or immediate, direct, is that they had better weapons. They had better armor. They had stronger weapons. So the proximal answer, or the proximal cause to why we see variation, is because they just had better weapons. A distal cause could be one that is part of history, part of something that happened initially, further back in time, being the environment that the Spanish found themselves in allowed for the domestication of animals and for the cultivation of crops. Because the Incas were centered in a very mountainous region, this was much more difficult for them. So through domestication, this allowed the Spaniards to specialize and develop large communities, and in these large communities take on different roles. That because they're able to domesticate animals, start farming, they had bigger communities, and in those bigger communities, people could focus narrowly on one topic, one being maybe armor forging and metallurgy. And because they had these opportunities that were a result of early historical circumstances, they were able to develop more complex armor, more efficient or stronger weapons. So the proximal cause is like the why could they do that? And you just say, well, duh, because they had better weapons. So it's kind of like the immediate answer to why, whereas the distal cause is one that comes from history, following back the first why, and then asking, why that? Why that? Why that? A bunch of times till you arrive at a point in history where you talk about an initial cause that built up over a series of generations. An example of this in, let's say, real life, or more specifically in cross-cultural research, is the rice hypothesis. And this hypothesis was center to a study conducted by a series of researchers in cross-cultural research, where they wondered if growing different crops, rice or wheat, made you more or less independent. This study hypothesized that if you farmed rice, you would be more interdependent. The reason being that rice cultivation requires a lot of work with a community, that families, as a part of growing rice, have to work together to time when they flood the fields, when they do their harvest. If you flood too early, you're going to piss off your neighbors because they weren't expecting their fields to get flooded too. If you flood yours, it floods everybody's. So in rice growing regions, it might be important for community values, for collectivistic, interdependent types of values to exist in order to subsist on rice farming. In comparison, farming wheat doesn't require as much of that community kind of collaboration. If you're farming wheat or barley or corn, it doesn't require a complex series of irrigation, and basically one family can do it on its own, without the help of others or without worrying about the timing of others. So this study hypothesized that if you farmed rice, you were more likely to value coordination and cooperation, whereas if you farmed wheat, you were more likely to value independence and doing things on your own. Now, interestingly, different parts of China have more or less wheat or rice farming depending on the region, north or south, just kind of based on climate things. And China is often thought of as a very collectivistic culture. So the researchers were interested in whether this farming had an association with differences between northern and southern Chinese people in their ways of thinking. And what they found supported their hypothesis. Looking at various measures of independence and interdependence, this study found that those Chinese people that grew in rice farming regions were more interdependent, more collectivistic in their ways of thinking, compared to those who lived in wheat farming regions, who were more independent in their ways of thinking. And to clarify, these were not even farmers. Like, these are not people who farmed rice or farmed wheat. They just lived in a region where there was more rice farming or more wheat farming. So this suggests kind of that these things permeate into culture, right? It's not just rice farmers who are more interdependent, but the whole region of rice farming. Even if you weren't a rice farmer, if you lived in that region, grew up in that kind of cultural group, you were more interdependent, even though you didn't farm rice. So, if you're interested in this and other examples of how climate and environment and resources can shape cultural differences, you can check out this video by CGP Grey. They do some amazing things, and I love their videos. You can see the link here, you can see the name here, and I'm sure the link will be in the description. All right. So let's think about Midwest nice. A lot of you from the Midwest, either from Wisconsin, Minnesota, or a surrounding area. So thinking about cultural differences between the Midwest and other regions of the US. One of them is Midwest nice. I'd like you to reflect why you think Midwest nice exists. What maybe cultural, historical, geographical, proximal, and distal reasons might have led to Midwest nice?